My mother started school when she was 6 and he just called himself Ziadin Yusufzai, our clan name. 3. Growing up in a school. My mother started school when she was 6 and stopped the same term. She was unusual in the village as she had a father and brothers who encouraged her to go to school. She was the only girl in a class of boys. She carried her bag of books proudly into school and claims she was brighter than the boys. But every day she would leave behind her girl cousins playing at home, and she envied them. There seemed no point in going to school to just end up cooking, cleaning, and bringing up children. So one day, she sold her books for 9 annas, spent the money on boiled sweets, and never went back. Her father said nothing. She says he didn't even notice, as he would set off early every morning after a breakfast of cornbread and cream, his German pistol strapped under his arm, and spend his days busy with local politics or resolving feuds. Besides, he had 7 other children to think about. It was only when she met my father that she felt regret. Here was a man who had read so many books, who wrote her poems she could not read, and whose ambition was to have his own school. As his wife, she wanted to help him achieve that. For as long as my father could remember, it had been his dream to open a school. But with no family contacts or money, it was extremely hard for him to realize this dream. He thought there was nothing more important than knowledge. He remembered how mystified he had been by the river in his village, wondering where the water came from and went to, until he learnt about the water cycle from the rains to the seas. His own school in the village had been just a small building. Many of his classes were taught under a tree on the bare ground. There were no toilets, and the pupils would be sent to the fields to answer the call of nature. Yet, he says, he was actually quite lucky. His sisters, my aunts, did not go to school at all, just like the millions of girls in my country. Education had been a great gift for him. He believed that lack of education was at the root of all Pakistan's problems. Ignorance allowed politicians to fool people and bad administrators to be re-elected. He felt schooling should be available for all, rich and poor, boys and girls. The school that my father dreamt of would have desks and a library, computers, bright educational posters on the walls, and most importantly, washrooms. My grandfather had a different dream for his youngest son. He longed for him to be a doctor. And as one of just 2 sons, he expected him to contribute to the household budget. My father's elder brother, Saeed Ramzan, had worked for years as a teacher at a local school in the mountains. He and his family lived with my grandfather, and whenever he saved up enough of his salary, they built a small concrete hujra at the side of the house for guests. He brought logs back from the mountains for firewood, and after teaching, he would work in the fields where our family had a few buffaloes. He also helped Baba with heavy tasks like clearing snow from the roof. When my father was offered a place for his A-levels at Zenhansep College, which is the best further education institution in Swat, my grandfather refused to pay for his living expenses. His own education in Delhi had been free. He had lived like a talib in the mosques, where local people provided the students with food and clothes. Tuition at Zehanzeb was free, but my father needed money to live on. Pakistan doesn't have student loans, and he had never even set foot in a bank. The college was in Saidu Sharif, the twin town of Mingora, and he had no family there with whom he could stay. There was no other college in Shangla, and if he didn't go to college, he would never be able to move out of the village and realize his dream. My father was at his wits' end and wept with frustration. His beloved mother had died just before he graduated from school. He knew if she had been alive, she would have been on his side. He pleaded with his father to relent, but to no avail. His only hope was his brother-in-law from Karachi. My grandfather suggested that they might take my father in so he could go to college there. The couple would soon be arriving in the village as they were coming to offer condolences after my grandmother's death. My father prayed they would agree. But my grandfather asked them as soon as they arrived, exhausted after the 3-day bus journey. His son-in-law refused outright. My grandfather was so furious, he refused to speak to them for their entire stay. My father felt he had lost his last chance, and that he would end up like his brother, teaching in a local school. The school where Uncle Khan Dada taught was in the mountain village of Siwur, about an hour and a half's climb from their house. It didn't even have its own building. They used the big hall in the mosque, in which they taught more than 100 children ranging from 5 to 15 years old. The people in Siwur were Gujars, Kohistanis, and Mians. We regard Mians as noble or landed people, but Gujars and Kohistanis are what we call hilly people, peasants who look after buffaloes. Their children are usually dirty and looked down upon by our village people, even though they are poor themselves. They are dirty, black, and stupid, people would say. Let them be illiterate. It is said that teachers don't usually like to be posted to those remote schools, and generally made a deal with their colleagues so that only one of them would go to work each day. If the school had 2 teachers, each would go for 3 days and sign the other in. If they had 3 teachers, each would go for just 2 days. Once there, all they were concerned with was to keep the children quiet with a long stick, as they could not imagine education would be any use to them. My uncle was more dutiful. He liked the hilly people and respected their tough lives. So he went to the school most days and actually tried to teach the children. After my father had graduated from school, he had nothing to do, so he volunteered to help his brother. There his luck changed. Another of my aunts had married a man in that village, and they had a relative visiting called Nasser Pacha, who saw my father at work. Nasser Pacha had spent years in Saudi Arabia, working in construction, making money to send back to his family. My father told him he had just finished school and had won a college place at Zehanzeb. He did not mention he could not afford to take it, as he did not want to embarrass his father. "Why don't you come and live with us?" asked Nasir Pacha. "Oof, I was so happy by God," says my father. Pacha and his wife Jajai became his second family. Their home was Sapal Bandi, a beautiful mountain village on the way to the White Palace, which my father says was a romantic and inspirational place. My father went there by bus. The village seemed so big to him compared to where he was born that he thought he'd arrived in a city. As a guest, he was treated exceptionally well. Jajai replaced his late mother as the most important woman in my father's life. When villagers complained to her he was flirting with a girl living across the road, she defended him. "Ziauddin is as clean as an egg with no hair," she said. "Look instead to your own daughter." It was in Sapal Bandi where my father encountered women who had great freedom and were not hidden away, as in his own village. The women of Sapal Bandi had a beautiful spot on top of the mountain, where only they would congregate to chat about their everyday lives. It was unusual for women to have a special place to meet outside the home. It was also there that my father met his mentor, Akbar Khan, who, although he had not gone to college himself, lent my father money so he could. Like my mother, Akbar Khan may not have had much of a formal education, but he had another kind of wisdom. My father often told the story of the kindness of Akbar Khan and Nasir Pacha to illustrate that if you help someone in need, you might also receive unexpected aid.